Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness and spirituality. Today's episode is about soulful parenting, the importance of the sacred in one's life, and a new vision for men's spirituality. On today's episode, we'll be featuring our guest, David Harshada Wagner. David is a creative mindset consultant, spiritual teacher, author, artist, and proud father who has dedicated more than 30 years of his life to the path of selfless service, spiritual awakening, and radical self-transformation. He's been helping people from all walks of life, all over the world, and helping them live magnificent lives for more than 25 years. He's also the author of the bestselling men's book, Backbone, and is working on his new book based on the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Thanks so much for joining us today, David. Really excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, Yasmin.
So, David, on your website, you write, in quotes, "You deserve the best of life, and life deserves the best of you." Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Yeah. When I look at the overall kind of overarching need for what I do in the world, there's so many opportunities to get caught in details, whether it's, teaching meditation and meditation techniques, or the men's work that I do, or the work that I do with parents, or the creative mindset work. And basically, when I look at it and I look at all the things that I do and all the things that I've done, on one hand, you deserve the best of life. Okay, most people can kind of get that. Like, we deserve the best relationships, we deserve the best health, the best experience of our work in the world, everything. And also, there's another part to that transaction, which is then I believe that the world really deserves the best of us, that life itself, it's such a magnificent thing, life. And, life deserves the best of us just the same way we deserve it. So it's like, it's reciprocal, like there can be so much self-absorption is a word in the kind of modern new age, spirituality, self-help kind of thing. It's all about the first half of that, of having the best for me. But, I also really believe in service, and I believe in the way that when we uplift ourselves, we uplift the world around us. And it's just such an important part of it. So yeah, that's become kind of the masthead of the work in the past few years.
I love that so much. I really resonate with that as well. Like, I think a lot of people on the path are really focused on their own personal journey, and it becomes somewhat individualized and disconnected from the greater whole. And so I think that realizing that we're all just this interconnected web, not only just as humans, but as nature, we're interconnected with nature. We kind of work together with everything. So I just think that's really beautiful. David, you coach others on soulful parenting. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Sure. I myself am a parent. I have 2 kids that are school age. My son is 8 and my daughter just turned 6. And what I found was that, before I was a parent, I had lots of students and lots of people that I worked with that were parents. But becoming a parent myself, recognizing the unique challenges and opportunities in that, and how, again, it kind of comes back to that first idea that when our spirituality or our self-help or our transformation, healing process, however you want to look at it, when it's all about us, that all about us mentality does not survive parenthood. And so what people will then end up doing is they'll have kids and then they just drop their spiritual practices, or, they drop that drop that aspect of being a seeker. And what I find is that it's even more important in many ways to doing the work when we're parents, but it's unique. Our needs as parents are unique. And then, this term soulful parenting, it's like, I don't know about you, but my house as an adult is very different than the house that my parents had, that I grew up
Yeah.
in. And there are many things that I want to carry forward that came from my parents and came from past generations. But culturally, we're doing something very different in my current family. And so many people I feel like, in this contemporary age, parents are really doing things that parents have never done before. And, there's so much pressure, consumer pressure and pressure from technology, and so many things that are easy to get caught up in if we're not paying attention and we're not being soulful. And so the idea is, it's like, okay, well, let's do this in a new way. Let's do this, however, in a way that is rooted to tradition and to lineage and to our roots. But let's like really be soulful about it, and let's be conscious about the choices that we make, so that our experience as parents can have that soulful quality. In other words, like I said before, we don't detach from our own process of evolution as individuals, but then also so that we can really bring our best to those relationships with our kids, because they really deserve it.
Right, right. I think, I am not a parent, but I am an auntie to many little babies. And
Mhm.
I've often, a lot of my friends have said the same thing over and over again. They've said that they have almost little to no time for themselves. And I think oftentimes their children become their lives. But at the same time, they also say that becoming a parent is a meditation, because your children are so present and so in the moment, especially when they're very young, that it forces you to also become very present and in the moment. And I think, so it's this interesting, conversation, about parenting, and I think the spectrum of people who feel like they have lost their individuation to people who have maybe, maybe are actually going deeper into themselves because of their experience having a child and having to be so present. So it's super interesting. I mean, I think we could probably spend just a couple hours
Yeah.
talking about this topic alone, and there's so much to
Yeah.
talk about. But it's something that I'm really interested in, and I've just been observing, adjacently to all the people that I know in my life who are parents, and really new parents as well.
Yeah. I mean, it goes both ways. Like for some people, they get really lost in the process of parenting. And for some people, and again, I think it's important that they, like you said, parenting can be like a meditation. But that takes some focus, and it's not as easy as it may sound. And it's a spiritual path. It's a spiritual discipline, like so many other things.
Right, right. I mean, how do you encourage parents or anyone really to focus on themselves when they're so busy today? I think there's been, so many articles that have come out about how workism is our new religion. People have treated work as kind of like their identity. And oftentimes, and I think one of the stats that I read was that like 87% of people are not even engaged with their jobs. And so, so I'm curious, like, and maybe this leads into my next question, which is about cultivating the sacredness and rituals in everyday life. How are those two things how do you play with those two concepts with your clients?
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate those questions. I'm trying not to just like give like a knee jerk answer. Um,
Yeah.
we're so used to hearing all of the politicians that already have their stump speech, their stump speech ready. Um, and and the reason why I want to consider it is because, I myself have been a seeker for my whole adult life, and, have been teaching now for a long time. And all of this continues to unfold and continues to require me to adapt,
Yeah.
as I move through different stages in my life, as I move through different moments in the collective.
Mm-hmm.
In this moment of the collective where there's this global pandemic that's happening, and you know being soulful in this moment is different than it was in October of 2014, and I
Yeah.
hope it's really different than it's going to be in October of 2022. um it's like a matter of taking a step back and almost having like a conversation, and this is going to sound really, really intense, but having a conversation with death,
Mm.
and having, in other words, like just imagining, like that kind of retrospective examination. Like we die and we look back, and we look at this moment, and or if that's too much, then we can think of ourselves as like an old wise version of ourselves, like in a rocking chair looking back. um, but it's like, what do we where are we, who are we with? And a big question is, what are we missing?
Hmm.
Like, not in the sense of like, what are we missing, like what are we not getting, but what are we missing, like what are we not seeing? Who are we not really seeing? Who are we not really loving the way that they deserve to be loved? Because everyone says that, when we're on our deathbed, those are the things that we're thinking about. We're not thinking about our money so much. We're not thinking about like our projects at the office, but we're thinking about our loved ones and our kids, and the way that we have either embraced or not embraced the experience of being alive.
Mm.
And it's like, that's it in a nutshell. But like you said, what did you call it? Workism?
Workism. It was in the Atlantic the other
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, workism. I love that. Yeah, so in that, it's workism is also, it's part of consumerism, because we have these jobs that we work all the time to make enough money to pay for all the things that we pay for, so that we can be comfortable enough to sleep at night, to get up in the morning and go back to work too much, in many cases. um and it's a matter of being able to step out of that circle. um I think both periodically, like being able to take a little retreat every now and then, but also regularly. And this comes back to the, rituals in daily life and practices in daily life. Um, but, I think it's important for people to have a vision, to really know their purpose in life and have a vision for it, and, to update that vision regularly. And then, to keep track of it, like with a journal, like get up in the morning, and when you're having your morning tea or coffee, in addition to listening to the news, also sit down and make some news, sit
Right.
down and, look at like, this is okay. This is where I'm at with this vision. Here's how my dream is evolving right now. Like, how are my kids doing? What's my vision for them this week? These sorts of questions that, um, if all of a sudden everything is taken away, those are the things that we care about. And it's a matter of like, I believe the modern seeker, the modern sacred practitioner, that's a big part of it. It's like just learning how to have one foot outside of this whole drama that we're living in, so that we can reflect on how we are playing our role in it or not.
Yeah, beautiful. Like having an observer view rather than maybe the first person view.
I was going to say that, this is part of like the creative process. Like a lot of the people that I consult with are creatives, especially here in Southern California where I live, people in the, movie industry or TV industry and so on. But, but anyone that I talk to as a creative in the sense of, because I went to art school once upon a time. And, you know, for a lot of my adult life, I have not been an art maker. Like my creative work has mostly been my teaching and creating events. But what I really learned from all of my art teachers who were artists themselves was that I learned how to approach life from that artistic point of view. From this point of view that's really observing and kind of not getting too caught up in the rat race that we can't artfully craft the way that we're living. That's really what it comes down to.
Right, right. That's beautiful. Yeah, I think most of us, I was listening to something that Elizabeth Gilbert shared on Audible the other day about how most of us are kind of thrown into this world of produce and consume if we're not told that we have, incredible talent in the arts. And so it kind of deters us from just being makers. And I think that's such a powerful reminder that, deep within each of us, there is a maker that is interested in making something, even if it's not something that necessarily needs to be produced or consumed, right? It's just, there's a desire to just, create for the sake of creating.
Yeah.
David, you spent a lot of time in India, and I definitely want to get into that story and your journey in a little bit, but I'm curious if you could tell us about what you learned from your experience with a tuk tuk driver. I thought that this story was just so beautiful, and I thought it would be interesting for you to share. Maybe take out some of the swear words in Hindi.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Because all of my Indian folks in Dubai will be listening to this, maybe. So. I mean, India has been a big part of my journey because that has been what my spiritual training has been connected to, of studying Vedanta and yoga and, tantric Shaivism and all these different kind of currents that come from India. So, my teachers have been Indian, and, going to India has been a big part of my life. I bring groups of people to India every year. This will be the first January in 15 years that I haven't brought a group to India.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because, now I have people there that are really family to me by now, and that I only really see when I go there for work. But so I think you're referring to this story, that there's a particular story, but there could be, many of them. But, where there's something about the land of India and the chaos, beautiful chaos of India, that like mysteries can hide in the crevices, with so many different crevices and nooks and crannies available.
Yeah.
So, so they have these auto rickshaws, and, in some places they're called tuk tuks, that are like these little 3-wheel machines, and you sit in the back and they have like a little roof to them. They're like these little capsules. And in many cities, this is a, common form of public transportation. And I was in Delhi one year doing some work, and I was there for a few weeks, and I had to take these auto rickshaws all the time. And the Delhi auto rickshaw drivers are notorious for fleecing customers. And not just foreign customers either, but it's just, you talk to anyone in Delhi and they'll tell you, you have to, haggle with them, and, they'll try to swindle you. And And then being a European, American person, then they just think even more so that they have a license to fleece. And so every day, multiple times a day, I would have to have these haggling conversations with these guys. And I speak some Hindi and enough to, negotiate those sorts of things. And, in most places in India, I could just speak Hindi to someone and they just assume that they can't pull one over on me. But in Delhi, they're pretty fearsome. So there was this one particular day where I'd had it. I'd been there for several days and had, gone through this ritual so many times. And I was in this big gang of all of these rickshaw drivers, and they were kind of ganging up on me. And, one was saying, no, don't listen to him. It's 500. Here, I'll take you for 400. But it was really like 40 is what it should have been. And this is going on, and I was getting my ego was getting inflamed because I was aggravated, but I was also feeling disrespected. And so I started using some choice expressions in Hindi that I've learned along the way. If they're translated literally, none of them mean anything too bad. But in the context, they're very, very crude. They're very vulgar. And especially for a guest to be speaking that, then it comes out even worse. And I'm letting it fly in all directions and kind of losing my cool. And this one rickshaw driver sitting there watching, and he just gestures to me, and he's being kind of cool. He's not in the whole fray. And so I go over to him and I'm like, yeah, what? Like, what are you gonna say? 300. And he says, no, just get in. And that's one of the things that they do. They say, oh, just get in. I've got you. Pay whatever you like. That's what they say. And then they say, well, no, it's 400.
Yeah.
So he's doing that. He said, just get in. I was like, yeah, how much? He's like, as you wish. And I was like, yeah, as I wish. I'm going here. I go here every day. It's 40 rupees. He's like, yeah, 40 rupees, whatever. It's fine. Just get in. So I'm like, oh, finally. So I'm sitting in this thing, and he pulls off, and he's kind of cruising through Delhi, and it's in a very populous part of town, and he's cruising along, and I see him looking at me in his rearview mirror, and he says, "You speak Hindi?" And I say yes, and he's like, "Very good." And so finally, he's like, somebody's recognizing how awesome I am, and my ego is starting to feel a little bit better. And then he says, but when you're talking to those men, you sound like a naughty schoolboy. And he was like scolding me, and I was like, he's like, those things that you were saying are very bad things to say in Hindi. and then I was just sort of like, I just kept quiet, and he kept going, and he goes, what are you doing here in Delhi? And I said, I'm a teacher of Vedanta. So embarrassed now because I'm acting like the most unspiritual, unvedantic, jerk. and he just cruises along, and then he kind of gestures to all the people that are around, and he says, I believe that God lives inside of everyone, which is one of the basic teachings of Vedanta. And I could just feel his vibration, like I'm in his little cab thing. And I could just feel his vibe, and I could just see that he's like really like kind of rooted in that. And he said, I believe that God lives inside of everyone. I said, do you believe that? And that kind of like snapped me out of my ego fever. And I kind of connected back into my heart, and I was like, yeah, I do. And he looks in the rearview mirror. He says, that's how you should talk to people. Not the way you were talking to those men back there. And I was like, yeah, you're so right. And so we get to the place and, I gave him his 40. And then I had like a couple hundred more in my pocket, and they gave that to him and he just pushed it away. And he said, no, I said it was 40. And I said, yeah, the 40 is for the ride. And this is dakshina, which means like, it's like when the money that you give to a guru. And I said, this is for your upadesh. Like, this is for your spiritual teaching.
Wow.
And I'll never forget that. It didn't fix me. I was still a jerk, after that, but it definitely did something for me.
Oh, I love that story so much. I think, there's such power also in these, I would call them like hinge moments or transformational moments where you're moving
Yes.
in one direction and then all of a sudden, there's an enlightened experience. And it could be just like the most simple of moments, right? Like you're in you're in the back of a tuk tuk and you have this like really powerful message, on how to treat people. And it's just a really cool, powerful, deep message in these really simple moments in life. And I think a lot of people are looking for these deeper, transformational moments in transcendental experiences, but they happen all the time around us. So I just really love that story, and I'm so happy that you shared it.
Yeah. I mean, the skeleton of that story is an opportunity for everyone where, because we all have people, whether we want to admit it or not, we all have people that we don't really think of that are equal to us. Like, I know politically that's not a cool thing to say, but just the way that our ego works, somebody is just like, they're not really a person. They're just a means to an end, a waiter at a restaurant or a driver or, someone who's doing some kind of a labor job, and they are trying to not get in our way and disturb us, someone working on the garden or cleaning the house or something. And when we can step out of that mentality that we're in, it's a kind of a colonial mentality, and just look at them and just remember that they are a soul, that this isn't just this lady that comes and cleans my house, but this is somebody's mom. This is somebody's daughter. And ultimately, this is my sister. This is my sister under God. And even if we don't speak the same language, even if really there's no business, we have no business talking to each other. In some cases, that's just the case. But to not take that as an excuse to ignore people. And the same thing goes for kids. And that's one of the hallmarks of soulful parenting is that, my 6-year-old daughter, Rabia, she's a 6-year-old. She just turned 6 and, she's very little. But her soul isn't just 6. It's like she is my 6-year-old daughter, and I still have to help her with the bathroom or help her to just do some really basic learning things in life. But that doesn't mean that I'm better than she is, or that she's less important than I am. And the other piece of it, like you were saying, it doesn't mean that she's more important than I am just because she's my kid. Like I'm her father, I'm her protector, I'm her provider, I'm her, her God in a certain way right now. And I can get really lost in just putting all of her needs ahead of mine in a way that is unconscious. And, going both ways like that is just such a huge doorway to expanded consciousness, like worth 10 million meditations. If you can have an encounter with somebody who on the outside is not equal to you, they're younger than you, they work for you, you work for them, you're below them in some way. And you let that fall away and just see them, straight from the heart. That experience is worth, so many drops of, any kind of spiritual meditation thing,
Wow. Yeah, that's such a powerful statement, David. I mean, I think that we live in such a hierarchical society. I mean, even, we're dealing with like the effects of a post-colonial world, right? And so actually there still is colonialism, but
Yeah,
even in the West, like we're even though we're trying to become equal, I think that we're still dealing with this construct that has existed underneath the
yeah,
surface. And so it's just an interesting exercise of deconditioning, yourself to seeing someone as no greater than and no less than yourself. And that's really powerful,
yeah,
especially as a parent. Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And especially when people aren't acting like it. And here in the US, we have this really huge division and contentious election. And, when somebody is on that other side, it's really hard not to see them as stupid, or see them as like bad people, or see them, we can get so warped into, okay, we have a different point of view in this situation. And they're a child of God, just like anyone, just like my daughter Rabia, this angry racist, like inflamed, American person, acting so ugly, you could say, is just as beautiful as Rabia doing her dancing, or like being an angel. Just the same way that she's just as beautiful when she's not being an angel, when she's crying or fighting me, or giving me a hard time about something. It doesn't change how precious she is. And the same thing goes for all the people that we're constantly at odds with in this moment of human evolution.
Right, right. Ah, yeah, so powerful. And, I think this is a good segue into this next question, because I think you kind of hit on this. You have a concept of the men's work on your website. And
Mm,
I'm really curious how you define this new vision for men's spirituality.
yeah. Yeah, thank you for asking that. Yeah, what happened is, at one point in my career, I just noticed that there were no men. Like I would do a big retreat at Kripalu, or one of these places, and it would be 97% female, and then the 3% that were male, a lot of them were, maybe like non-binary, non-gender conforming, kind of effeminate men, or confused husbands, that had been drugged there by their wife against their will. And as I was, coming into the gauntlet of parenthood myself, and needing to work out some of the issues with my own father, my own masculinity, my own identity as a man, I started to really look at this, and just realize that much of the modern spirituality, um, was marketed to women,
Mm,
and really developed for women, because in the West, you look at the way that women have blossomed since the 1950s, and to the point where now they run for president, and they're on the Supreme Court, and like, whereas in my mother's generation, it was a completely different expectation. And so women have had this huge meteoric expansion that they've had to do. And so then, we have Oprah, you know, and things like Deepak Chopra in the New Age, what I call it the Oprah Chopra revolution, um, where like yoga is a household name now, and everything from essential oils to mindfulness practices to, uh, just this general idea of holistic wellness. But um, it's mostly been aimed towards women. And as I started to look at this, I just started to wonder, well, how much of it is the packaging, which is a lot of it, frankly, like it's, very lavender in the way that it's packaged usually. But then there are other things about it too that just like come down into the sort of the nature of masculine and feminine energy, and just the masculine energy just is not so represented oftentimes. So I set off and I wrote a book called Backbone that is kind of a primer for men, and I wrote it in a way that you could just give to your uncle. That has no, basic interest in spirituality, and he could kind of navigate it. But I also wrote it for all of the quote unquote spiritual men who are very spiritual, but that had kind of renounced their masculinity as something bad. Where like we have a toxic father, or we have an experience of toxic masculinity, and then we're like, okay, I'm not into that. I'm going to be a gentleman. I'm going to be a spiritual man. But yet then we have to ignore this whole side of us, kind of similar to the whole thing that women have had to do, where they had a big movement of, learning how to be more assertive and forceful and professional, and then have had to go back and reclaim some of the more traditionally feminine energies. It's the same kind of thing for men.
Yeah, I think also the integration of the masculine and feminine, I think, is the work that every single human is doing right now, because we've exactly like you said, like the women who have been successful in the corporate world have done it from a masculine frequency. And I think a lot of times what I've also noticed too is that, the concept of just man up, don't get emotional, don't look like a girl. Those kinds of language were language that I remember hearing directed towards men when I was growing up, and so there was no real space for men to develop a relationship with their emotional world. And I think now now we're trying to create the tools, and we're trying to make it much more acceptable. But yeah, I mean, I think that's probably why. You know what? I'm not going to say that last part. I was going to say that's probably why there's a lot more, crime committed by men versus women, because there's just like a lack of connection with heart and emotional development and spiritual development versus women. So yeah, it's really,
I mean, there's lots in that whole examination for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your website mentions tantric Shaivism, and tantra is a buzzword. Can you tell us about this? What does it mean? What does tantra mean to you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say what it doesn't mean. And the reason why it's a buzzword is because it's also very associated with sacred sexuality, or this sort of, it's a very modern idea, but it's this kind of spiritually enhanced sexuality. And, people know that these, stars like Sting or Madonna and these different people, they do these tantric sex practices. And so that's oftentimes what the word tantra is immediately associated with. That's not what I'm into. The tantra is one of the mystical Indian philosophical, what's called a darshana, but it's like one of the whole kind of perspectives of Indian philosophy that came relatively later compared to the other old philosophies. And what it is it's the view that that everything is sacred, and that it's considered a non-dualistic philosophy, meaning that things like good and bad and all of the different pairs of opposites are only relative, but that everything is made of the same stuff, and that stuff is inherently sacred and good. That like the whole material universe, even though it has so many different flavors and colors and shades, the whole material universe is of the same creator and made of the same stuff, which is not different from that creator. And practically how that comes out in the way that I teach, or that tantric people will teach, is, what I've talked about a little bit already, but it's like, how do we find the sacred in the ordinary? And how do we take, our material existence and not shun it as a distraction? Like, that's the ascetic point of view, is, let me not have sense pleasures, let me not have wealth, let me not have the distractions of the world, so that I can focus on the divine. And all traditions have that ascetic tradition. And the tantric view is more like, well, no, have money, but just have it in a very excellent way. And have it in a way that doesn't distract you. And in fact, use that pursuit of abundance and wealth as a pursuit of excellence within yourself. And have relationships, but just have them in an excellent way, where, your relationships with your kids or your partners or your lovers or your friends have that same sacredness to them. Same thing with your body, same thing with our relationship to the earth. That the earth isn't just this stepping stone to heaven, but actually this earth is a manifestation of that heavenly energy. And how do we relate to it with a sense of deep reverence? That's the view of Tantra. And then also, like, let our sexuality be magnificent. If we're going to have a sexuality, let it be something that is really, really good. And, let us train ourselves, with that. But to me, and there are practices that come from that part of tantric tradition, where you can have sexual training, for sure. But to me, it's not different than food, and if you're going to cook food, be a good chef. If you're going to go for a walk, go for a magnificent walk in the most beautiful place you can, and enjoy it as deeply as is available to you. And if it's not available to you, then do the practices to make yourself more open. Does that make sense? It's kind of a long answer, but like, I always like to really advocate for the traditional understanding of Tantra, instead of, the image that people have of like wild sex positions, or, like candles and chakra posters, and the Kama Sutra, or what. Kama Sutra doesn't have anything to do with Tantra at all.
I think there's definitely a lot of confusion around the word Tantra. So I really appreciate that you described that for us, because I think there's something really beautiful about this definition to me, that is this interconnected relationship, and also giving it your all, like really just being in whatever you're doing. Which like, if I could live my life, and I think if all of us could live our life that way, to just be totally into whatever we're doing and wherever we are, I think we could literally have such a blissful life. It would be heaven on earth. So I love that. And David, can you tell us about your journey? How did you learn your philosophy? Maybe you could just walk us through how you learned about all these different concepts and how you brought them to your work.
Sure. I kind of went to the spiritual school of hard knocks, you could say, in some ways. I was raised in a family where my parents were alcoholic, and not necessarily what you think of, like yelling and breaking things and like that. They were middle class, people that were kind of civilized in a certain way, but were also addicted to alcohol, and as such were checked out from their inner life and their emotional life. And um, I and all of my brothers, we all came into adolescence and young adulthood, as addicts ourselves. And, when I was a kid, I got into a lot of trouble with the police, and was, a very wild kid. I was into a lot of drugs and alcohol at a very young age. And for me, it wasn't just a big party, but I was a very unhappy kid. And just through the stroke of grace, I got turned on to the idea of conscious sobriety. When I was in high school, I was 16 going on 17. And at that time is when 12-step groups were becoming more known. And kids were being sent to rehab. It was like this was the 80s. And my girlfriend at the time got sent to rehab. She got busted and put in rehab. And I would go visit her by sneaking into 12-step meetings that they would take the kids to. There were public meetings, and I would like sneak her packs of cigarettes and, just go in there. And I think sometimes I would go high. But when I was there, as I encountered the people that had been consciously sober, and that's really a spiritual path. It's not just about getting free from the disease of addiction, but that's just the first step, and then the rest of it is this really deep spiritual path. And when I met those adults, it was the first time that I saw adults that I really admired and that had something that I wanted. And a lot of kids kind of discover what their passion is when they're young. And the athlete will like see the professional athlete and get inspired to go deeper into their game, or the artist will like see an artist and be inspired. And for me, as a young person, it was seeing spiritual people, and people that weren't religious, they were spiritual. And I could talk about that difference, but and as I got into that then eventually led me to the Eastern spirituality, to yoga and meditation, and eventually to going really deep into that, and like working with spiritual masters, and living in ashrams and going to India, and then just living my life, so completely sober, completely just facing life on life's terms, and really having to use my spiritual tools to help me. Because, some of your listeners might relate to this, but, when you're raised in the kind of family that I'm raised in, you don't get taught tools for living. And, my parents both passed away, relatively young, when I was relatively young. And so I didn't really have family to lean on. I didn't have those tools that were embedded in me by my family before they went. And so I just really, it's never been a theoretical path for me. It's always been deeply practical. And then being a teacher, being a healer, being doing, working with other people, and having the privilege of people really inviting me into their process, and just seeing, countless now, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people over the years move through, sometimes move through difficulties, sometimes, make their dreams come true, sometimes, really get to know get to know God, but not in a theoretical or religious way, but, in a really in a relational way that is free from the dogma, beyond all that stuff.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, David. That was really powerful. And I think it also gives a lot of people inspiration that no matter where you are, I think there's always a
Yeah.
way to move up, right? And
Yeah.
find the resources and find the tools. I think that what I've noticed this year is that so many people have given up. There's a sense of loss in
Yes.
terms of there's
Yes.
nothing out there for me. No one can fix me. No one can help me. Nothing works. And so I really want to encourage people to, look at your story, look at other stories, and see that there's absolutely always, there's infinite possibilities in how your life can turn out. So thank you for that. Wow.
Yeah.
David, what has changed with your work or your perspective since we started quarantine? And how do you envision a post-quarantine world?
I love that. I think that we're facing the end of the world in a certain way. I think that we're facing, the English word apocalypse comes from a Greek word that means the truth is revealed, that the veil is lifted. You can imagine, and I think that having the whole world kind of ground to a halt in a certain way. It could be way worse. It could be a much, I feel like this has been a very compassionate apocalypse so far. We're like, but enough of one that we do get really pulled back and we're like, oh yeah, well, what if none of our assumptions of how our life was going to go are going to come true? What if, the things that have made life relatively easy are suddenly just not available anymore? It's put people into that thought experiment. And so my work has changed. On a practical level, I'm not traveling. Before COVID, I would go on a trip at least once a month, most of which were overseas, to work with people and do workshops and retreats and things like that. Ordinarily, this time of year, I would be, I'd be on the road somewhere, and I'm not. I'm just here, and I'm working with people virtually. But I'm actually working with more people in a certain way because I'm having people, especially with the consulting work, that either for some practical reason need to recreate themselves or recreate their career or recreate things. But also, like the distractions are gone, and so people are facing they're facing relationships that maybe they don't want to be in anymore. They're facing stuff that before they were able to be distracted from. And so I'm working with a lot of people beautifully, and helping them to answer your second question, which is like to envision a post-apocalyptic world where I think that we're going to be called on to be architects of that world.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's like, this is such a crazy thing. I don't even know. I can't even imagine 3 weeks from now what we're going to be facing, and let alone 3 months or 6 months. But I think that what my work is, I would like to think that this is what it's always been about. But right now, it's like for real, for real, for real. What it's about is helping people to focus on what's truly important.
Right.
And to make that which is truly important to them the center of their life.
Right.
Instead of on the periphery. And, just giving, like helping people because it's, it doesn't mean just because it's really important that we know how to do it.
Right.
Like it can be very disconcerting when we realize, like most important thing in my life is to be a good dad. I have no idea how to be a good dad. Like I've gone to the office every day, 5 days a week, all day long, and played with my kid for an hour before they went to bed. And now my office is closed. And now here we are, and I have no idea how to relate to this person. Just as a for instance. But yeah, it's really deep, but it feels more important than ever.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that, there's a new kind of, runner in your life. And I think that we can't hide anymore. There's no hiding. So I love that that's the main takeaway. And what are some books or resources other than Backbone that you recommend our audience read or check out?
Oh boy, that's a huge question. Let me think of like a range here. Esther Perel's work about intimacy is beautiful. Anything by her. The book, the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield is an amazing book for anyone who's a creative.
Love that book.
Yeah, that one. Because there's so many different areas to sort of like take a stab at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think people should enjoy art. I've been getting really into Walt Whitman's Song of Myself and Leaves of Grass. His poetry.
Ooh.
Looking at stuff like that. I don't know why this is coming up, but one of your listeners needs to read this book called Shameless, which is by and her name is escaping me at the moment, but she's a Lutheran minister based in Denver. Amazing woman who went through the whole Bible and is just debunking all of the anti-woman and anti-sex ideas that have come into modern Christianity and debunking them based on theology and based on scripture. That's a brilliant book.
Her name is Nadia Bowles-Weber.
Yes.
Yeah.
Her work is incredible. Yeah, I mean, that will keep you busy. Oh, it's another one. I don't know why I'm thinking of all these Christian things, but there's a book called The Universal Christ by I like to think of him as like one of my spiritual uncles, Father Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan monk, but just super progressive, beautiful. And again, just sort of like taking something that is quite religious and just taking all of the BS out of it and just getting into the essence of, what the message, in his case, he's talking about Christ, but, it could just be any expression of divine love. I've been reading a lot of Coleman Barks renderings of Jalaluddin Rumi, and his Sufi messages. There's a book called The Essential Rumi, which is just a big collection of Coleman Barks renderings of that work. I'm just thinking of like the books that are on this, next to my bed right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. These are all great. I've read actually a lot of them, so definitely also recommend.
Yeah.
David, what do you want to tell our listeners about their health and wellness? What's the main takeaway?
Yeah. If we look at our bodies, not like a consumer, and not from the point of view of a consumer. In other words, how do we look? Like how well am I able to perform in my job? How's my cholesterol levels? Like in terms of my lifespan and my ability to earn. I don't know. but we look at our bodies more like a conservationist, and we look at our bodies like a wild animal that is living in a habitat that is probably not optimal. If we look at our body like a wild animal, that, what kind of water is it drinking? Is it drinking enough water? What kind of food is available to it? In what kind of toxins can we protect this animal from? What is its natural movement like? And does it have enough space to have that natural movement? What is its, how does it like to be pet? And, does it, what kind of pleasure does it enjoy? And is it getting pet enough? All of these things.
I love that.
But yeah, but because our body is just this innocent animal that has this owner, which is you. And, the owner may or may not have its best interests in mind. It might be, treating it like a donkey or a camel or something that is just like a work animal. And it forgot that, well, this, along with carrying my pack all day, this donkey also likes to get brushed and, run around and, be with other donkeys.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's beautiful. That's a really good reminder, I think, for everyone who kind of it's almost as if a lot of us are treating our bodies like it's a separate entity than us. We're like, so that's a great reminder. And David, are there any links that you can point folks to in order to learn more about your work? How can they get in touch with you since everything is on Zoom? Yeah, I'm sure that they can make an appointment online. So
sure. Yeah. I mean, on my social media, I'm very active. So whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, it's at David H. Wagner, H for Harshada. Make sure you put the H, because David Wagner is just some nice, computer engineer in Santa Barbara that gets way too many emails from people about their child's sexual trauma and, their crisis where they don't believe in God anymore and all these things. So David H. Wagner is my handle on social media. And then I have also been making visual art again, making paintings, and it's been a really cool response from people around the world, and people are buying my paintings and putting them in their homes. And not everyone is into abstract art. They're these sort of abstract expressionist paintings, but that is Wagner_paintings on Instagram, and that's sort of a fun thing to look at, even just for fun.
Amazing. I will go check that out. I think I've been picking up the habit of painting this year as well. This is a good year to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize how much of my time was taken with traveling. And it wasn't just the time when I was actually traveling, but then it's, packing and unpacking and planning and, only getting so rooted. And so any home that I've had for the past 20 years has been more like a base and less like a home. And, during COVID, I just realized that I could turn my backyard into a painting studio. And it doesn't really rain here during the summer months. And I have a whole body of work that I've done just this summer.
Wow, that's so cool. And I love that home has always been a base, not a home. I think that's true for a lot of people. David, thank you so much for your time. This was such a powerful conversation. I think it's going to really help a lot of people, and I'm just really grateful for your time. So thank you so much.
Well, I hope so. And I thank everyone who took the time to get to this point in the interview. And, your time is precious and I don't take it for granted. And, Yasmin, keep up the good work. This is such a amazing service that you're offering to your audience. And Just bless your work and may it prosper in every way.
Oh, thank you so much. I so appreciate that. Oh, thank you. For our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learn about soulful parenting, the importance of the sacred in one's life, and a new vision for men's spirituality. You can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness and spirituality. Thanks again.